Hello there, welcome back and welcome to part 60 in my build log series of the Trumpeter 1:200 scale model of the Titanic. Today I am continuing my work on the officers' quarters and at the end of the video I hope to have got it all painted up and scale decks applied as well. I probably won't get on to things like vents and lighting in this episode because there's an awful lot going on this part of the model, but we'll see where we get up to. Without any further ado, let's crack on. So, continuing my work on the officers' quarters, I've now added all of these light shrouds along the entire length. Hunky-dory, all good. But there's a few other bits I want to do before we get on and actually paint. The first thing is I want to have a couple of open doors. I want to have an open door for the gym, and that's because the gymnasium's windows were frosted. And of course I'm going to keep them frosted on my model. But in order to give us a little bit of a glimpse into the room, I'm going to cut this door open and have an open door, and that'll give us a sort of peek inside the room. The other thing I quite like to do is perhaps have a door open on the officers' quarters, perhaps on this side, and then I can maybe model a corridor behind, just to give the impression that there's, you know, rooms within this structure that you can't see. So I'm going to do that, and what I'll end up doing is I'll just sort of file these out and go from there. The other thing to do is I need to make a decision about what I'm going to put behind these windows. And my reading of the officers' quarters is that they would have been quite dark. The reason I say this is because this is where ships' officers lived. And as an officer, you'd either be on duty, so not in your room, or you'd be off duty, and off-duty things would consist of eating and probably sleeping. You know, these people are at work. They're not going to be sitting in their cabins all evening reading a book or whatever. I suspect that when officers were off duty and in their cabins, most of the time I expect they were probably sleeping. So I'm not going to have many of these windows lit. In fact, I'm probably only going to have maybe one cabin on each side lit. The others, I will black out the windows, I'll put some black plastic behind them, and I'll maybe put some sort of curtain-like colour material in front of that plastic. So the black plastic will stop any light shining out, and then I'll maybe put some curtain-like material, maybe a sort of reddish material in the windows. And hopefully that gives the idea that either officers are out on duty or they're asleep, and maybe there's just one or two turning in for the night or maybe getting dressed ahead of their shift. So that's what I need to do before we can get on and paint this. Not a huge amount of stuff, but obviously this is much better to be done now rather than after we painted it. I then need to add all the photo etch details, then we'll crack on with this painting. One thing just to address as well, in the last episode I said that this area here was missing a door and two windows, so what I had done is I'd cut some windows holes into the area, but I was actually incorrect, and thank you to Mark Pullen who put a comment in the last video talking about this piece. So this is a piece in the Trumpeter kit, and the idea of it is that you just stick it directly over the top. and it's got the door and windows already cut in. So what I've done is I've cut out the area behind, which I'd cut my windows in. Just cut it out completely, and then with this piece I have sanded it down, got rid of the indentation of the door, and I've cut 2 holes, one for the porthole in the door and one for the deck light. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to stick that over the top, and there we have the completed area. So sorry Trumpeter, I said you'd miss something out when you hadn't, and also thank you to Mark Pullen for actually spotting that and letting me know. In other news, I've now cut the door in the officers' quarters that I'm going to have open, and I've also cut the other door in the gymnasium. One thing this does do is it exposes the thickness of the plastic, and of course even with a door open you are going to see the thickness of the plastic, something which I don't really want to do. So I'm going to have to come up with a means of thinning this out a bit. More to follow. Right, I've solved the thickness problem, and all I've done, as you can see, is put a little chamfer, a bit like opening out the windows on a deck. But what that means is when you look at the window, sorry, the door, the wall appears nice and thin, whereas in reality it's very thick. But that little chamfer just sort of makes the wall appear nice and thin. So it's a nice little technique, and it's a lot easier than sort of cutting off all of this thick plastic along the side. So I'm quite happy with that. Just need to go and do the other door. So we're pretty much ready for painting, just need to add the photo etch detail. Another thing that I've done is I've cut the holes for the 2 skylights that were in this area. One, I think this one, went down into the Marconi room. The other, I can't remember, but went to another part of the officers' quarters. So they've been cut as well, because I quite like the idea of having a bit of light spilling out of them. The Marconi room especially would always have had light in because they had a 24-hour radio watch. Another thing I need to do is I need to cut the skid lights. So these are holes along the bottom of the officers' quarters, and they're not lights, so I'm not going to light them myself, but they are actually skylights into a deck's internal rooms to give the internal rooms some natural daylight. That was what they were there for. So I'll cut those just with a drill, and the KA set has some surrounds which go around those holes to neaten them up a bit. Just gonna do a bit of painting on the inside of this vent to make it look nice and grimy, like sort of measured finish. I'm just roughly painting this. There you go. Nice and easy. And then what we'll do is we will cut out the grill that we need, which in this case is this one here. Right, I've masked up the entire area. As you can see, I've masked around the walls to protect the white, and I've also masked around the dome area and also this ventilator at the back. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to spray paint the entire surface, but really focusing on the areas around the funnels in this colour here. That's matte 145. That's the same grey that I've used on all of the tops of buildings and stuff. So we'll get on and fill up the airbrush.
Right, let's just remove the masking tape, or indeed masking tape. Right, I'm just sort of putting down my scale decks. The idea partly to make sure that I've covered every area that needs to be in grey, which I have. I perhaps need to do a little bit of touching up along there, but otherwise fine. The other thing is just to make sure that the scale decks fits. And this will be the last bit of scale decks that I do on the entire model, which makes you think. And what I'm going to do now is, once I've touched up the grey, I'm going to go under everywhere that has scale decks and paint it black, just to make sure that the decking has the same colour as the rest of the decking. So there we go, nothing special and pretty rough if I'm honest, but it just doesn't really matter. The only thing that this achieves, painting this black, is that this stuff, the scale decks, is very thin. You can see when I hold it against the window, light actually shines through it. So what is beneath the scale decks matters, and if this was white and the deck beneath it was black, the deck beneath it would look darker than above, which is why I do everything in black underneath my scale decks. So I'll let this dry, then I'll glue the scale decks on, then we'll get on with photo etch, windows and all sorts of other stuff. So I've just got first bits of the scale decks down, this side and also this side. Need to do this piece later. In the meantime, I'm going to start looking at some of the ventilators. So I've just cut out all these vents and I've just sprayed them black, and you may be forgiven for wondering why on earth have I sprayed them black. The reason is because all of the China 3D prints come in a sort of orangey kind of resin, and the problem with that is if they're painted white on top, the light can shine through and give the part a sort of orangey glow, and a couple of people in the comments have pointed this out. So my proposed solution is to paint them black first and then to go over with white afterwards. So that's what we're doing. So the first thing I'm going to do is just paint the insides of these ventilators black, just to give the effect of, you know, light struggling to get in and also a bit of grime and dirt within as well. So I don't do this with any particular desire for accuracy. In fact, I actually prefer a sort of grayscale kind of effect because it gives you that impression of dust build-up more. So relatively rough. Apologies if you can hear background noise. TV is on in the other room. So that's the first one. And the last one.
Right, just doing the final piece of scale decks, and as always, just blobbing a bit of glue down. I'm using Gorilla Glue again. And as always, I'm being careful to make sure the glue gets right to the extremities, because what can happen otherwise is that corners will start to lift up. You'll often see this maybe after a couple of years of your model being on a shelf. You'll see that corners of things start to lift up, and that's normally because you've not quite been diligent enough with glue in the corners. So I'm making quite a lot of effort to make sure that all the nooks and crannies have glue in them. As this is just sort of wood glue, we don't have to be too worried about removing it later. If it was, you know, super glue, something like that, I'd be a bit more cautious, but wood glue is an easy thing to remove later. So, there we go. Okay. Now what I'm going to do, put my piece down onto the deck. So this seems like an appropriate place to stop. I have done more on the officers' quarters, as these photos suggest, but they will all be covered in the next episode. So next episode we'll be looking at things like ventilation, probably I'll get onto lighting as well, a little bit of weathering here and there perhaps as well, and I'll also be looking at what I'm going to do with the interior of the officers' quarters. So all that's come in the next episode. If you've enjoyed it, do please like and subscribe. If you've got any questions or comments, pop them down below and I'll do my best to get back to you. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.